So, interpreting a dream means assigning some sort of meaning to it or replacing the content of what you experience in a dream with some sort of meaning which logically fits into and makes sense in the context of our everyday waking life to explain our conscious actions and make our dreaming thoughts and behaviors bear validity and importance equal to the rest of our waking thoughts and behaviors. So there are several approaches to interpreting dreams. First is the symbolic method of dream interpretation, which considers the dream content in its entirety as a whole and seeks to replace it with another meaningful content which can be discerned and corresponds directly to the first one. So for example, you may dream of an owl flying, and you would take that dream as a whole and try to figure out what it means. Maybe the owl represents wisdom or predicts some sort of future event. For example, if you dream of an owl flying south, maybe you would interpret that as you need to move or travel south in your future. You would symbolically interpret it by taking the whole dream as one symbol instead of breaking down the meaning of an owl and the act of flying and the southward direction individually, which is what the decoding method does. So first, a critique of the symbolic method is that it is very subjective. You're placing the power of interpreting your dream usually in the hands of someone who claims to be an authority or expert in dream interpretation and are qualified in some way by possessing an innate ability to discern the significance of a dream that's told to them. So like a psychic or a prophet, like centuries ago, there were people whose entire profession was to listen to the dreams of powerful people and infer what the dream means for their future. And those powerful people would make political and military decisions based on this advice that would now seem a lot more dubious. Another critique of the symbolic method of dream interpretation is that it doesn't explain our really weird and random and completely unintelligible dreams because it requires a dream to be somewhat cohesive and make sense in itself. So an owl flying southward. And this also demonstrates how much of a reach it must be for those prophets and soothsayers to try to derive meanings and prophecies from the unintelligible garble and mishmash of signs and symbols in any given dream. Maybe these prophets would get lucky once in a while by just being very vague and general and end up getting a prediction right, such as what astrology attempts to do in a lot of cases. Or maybe the prophets just make an educated guess when predicting or interpreting someone's dreams based on what they know about that person's waking life. And it's hard to envision them now, but again, these were very popular and highly respected positions in other cultural historical contexts where these prophets and these psychics and these soothsayers had a built up reputation for dream interpretation. So to address some of these criticisms of the symbolic method, a second technique was later developed called the decoding method, which considers dream content as ciphers or codes which must be decoded and unraveled, where each sign can be translated into another sign with a known meaning in accordance with a fixed key or dream book or dream dictionary. You may be in possession of one of these. They're books in which you can look up the various individual symbols you experience in your dream to find the definition of each symbol. So decipher what they each conventionally mean according to that key. And then an individual, after finding the definition for each of the individual symbols in their dreams, they can combine them and consider them in conjunction with each other to derive some greater meaning from that dream, instead of having to interpret the dream as a whole all at once from the beginning, like in the symbolic method. So in these dream books, you might find a universal meaning for the dream symbol of an owl. so that anyone who has an owl appear in their dreams can refer to a key and translate their perceived imagery in their dreams and decode them to discover some sort of socially shared, universally true meaning that their dreams are trying to communicate during their sleep. So you can look up the universal meanings of the symbols of owls and the act of flying and the southward direction, all individually, and then link these individually decoded meanings to consider what they mean when combined as they were in your dream. A potential critique of the decoding method is that it implies that each of our dreams has a sort of director behind the scenes, sitting in their director's chair before the screening of each dream and deciding which objects in the dream are going to symbolize what. So, as if Steven Spielberg himself is preparing for filming tonight's dream, like, tonight I think I'll introduce a scene with a dog attacking the viewer to represent Andrew's internal conflict. Like, I don't think it's necessarily that rational of a logic behind the imagery we experience in our dreams and what they may symbolize. And even if there is some method to the madness, it's not like we all have the same director in our heads deciding that the same object is going to represent the same deeper meaning. And another critique is that, as we discussed over the past 2 weeks, nothing has a universal meaning. An owl appearing in one person's dreams doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as the owl in another person's dreams. How each individual interprets that dream symbol of an owl and what it means to them in the context of their own lives will be different based on a number of factors, which makes the interpretation of dream symbols a lot more personally based. Maybe you had a pet owl growing up who you loved so much and have great memories of. In that case, seeing an owl in your dream may evoke meanings of warmth and companionship and nostalgia. But maybe another person was involved in a serious traumatic incident involving an owl growing up. Maybe they were attacked by an owl as a child. So seeing that exact same owl in their dreams could evoke meanings of fear and dread and danger. So it's not like there's any one universal key or dream book that can accurately account for the wealth of personal differences inherent to our dream content and its potential underlying meanings. We all hold different meanings for and react to certain symbols, even when we perceive them in our dreams, based on our prior experiences with that signifier and what personally signified meanings it conjures up for each of us. So neither of these first two popular procedures for interpreting dreams can be employed for any sort of scientific treatment of a specific patient or subject. The symbolic method is restricted to the prophets whose alleged talents and expertise lay in appraising dreams and who don't even really exist anymore as a meaningful social role. And in the case of the decoding method, everything depends on the trustworthiness and the accuracy of the dream book or key, which is arbitrary, and there's no guarantee that their stated meaning of a symbol is different than your or similar to your personal meaning for a symbol. And using Freud's method, the third method, what we must take as the object of our attention and our analysis is not the dream as a whole, but the separate portions of its content. He wanted to segment the dream into smaller portions and ask the patient he was analyzing what they're experiencing and thinking in each particular part of the dream, and to give a series of associations as to what's occurring to them in connection to each piece, and then culminate to derive meaning from the dream as a whole. This part is similar in that respect to the decoding method, but Freud's method seeks to take each patient's personal circumstances into consideration without trying to aspire towards universalism or being arbitrary as the popular decoding method does. So Freud wants to untangle that garbled content of our dreams and interpret them en detail as opposed to en masse. So detail by detail, piece by piece, and then consider each piece in conjunction with the patient's personal circumstances and dispositions, and then finally culminate to what that dream could mean for them as a whole. So Freud was prepared to find that same piece of dream content may conceal a different meaning when it occurs in various people's dreams or in various contexts. So you have to take the subject's conscious life, their waking life, and behaviors and life experiences and conditions into consideration, because that will give you clues as to what the unconscious dream content is trying to tell you about that person's waking life. Freud believed that dreams were like picture puzzles, and though they may appear nonsensical and worthless on the surface image that the puzzle creates, through the process of interpretation, they can tell a lot about how that puzzle is put together, which is more important. So the process by which its interlocking of pieces or details come together to construct that nonsensical image on the surface or on the box of the puzzle. So the surface appearance of what our dreams look like, the image that's on the front of the box of the puzzle could mean nothing, could be a bunch of nonsense, but figuring out how those pieces fit together to form that nonsensical image gives us a better understanding of a person's unconscious desires and conscious behaviors that are represented indirectly by that surface appearance in their dreams. According to Freud, dreams are one, an unconscious working through of the previous day's thoughts and activities, which serve as the source of the imagery in our dream content. And two, dreams contain a wish fulfillment, usually in the form of a symbolic satisfaction of something that the unconscious id desires, but the conscious ego finds unacceptable and reproachable. So dreams allow for the id to indulge in itself and fulfill wishes that can't or won't be fulfilled by the ego in everyday waking life. And thirdly, dreams protect our sleep and stop us from waking up in a state of alarm and becoming alert all of a sudden by coding over our most raw and immediate desires and fears and convert them through this cipher, through this code that dreams construct, into more indirect represented images before presenting them to the dreamer in such a way that we can simultaneously acknowledge their existence, the existence of these greatest fears and desires we have, while not having to directly confront them or think about them in our dreams. And since many unconscious thoughts do not follow the moral code of society, the superego also plays a role in our dreams by intervening to censor our dream content and impose those socially constructed codes of acceptability to make the content of our dreams more acceptable and respectful, despite the best wishes of the id and its gratification of desires. So if it weren't for this superego kind of governing and censoring our dreams would probably be a lot more raw and primal and get to the root of what our id, our instincts really want. So our dreams don't show us our most raw and primal fears and desires, because that'll cause us to wake up and not be sleeping anymore, which is biologically what we don't want. Evolutionary, we've developed mechanisms to protect our sleep from our dreams, because as humans, we need sleep to recover and live. So this is a biological defense mechanism that protects our sleep from being disturbed by our dreaming. So let's say your immediate desire, your greatest desire, is to travel somewhere and fly away, as do we all. But the idea of traveling is so exciting to you that if you were to see images that directly represent travel in your dream, such as getting on a plane, it's too real in terms of what you desire, and it could wake you up because it's too exciting. So, in order to prevent you from waking up and ruining your sleep, your dream will code over the idea of traveling and present it to you in your dreams through more indirect symbols, such as an owl flying, for example. That's indirect enough to represent the idea of traveling that it won't wake you up from your sleep. And dreams do this with our fears too, not just our desires. So we won't often see the things we're most afraid of in our lives while we're dreaming, because that would constitute a nightmare and cause us to wake up immediately in a cold sweat of fear. So our dreams code over and distort our greatest fears to represent them in disguised and indirect ways. So, for example, most of us have a very common fear of death. And dreams will represent this fear, but not directly. They won't necessarily have you die in your dream or have someone you care about die in your dream. Because again, that idea is too alarming and it hits too close to home and taps into such a primal fear that it will wake you up. But this fear could be concealed and distorted and misrepresented or indirectly represented in your dreams in any number of indirect ways. And Freud thought we could then attempt to decipher these distorted images that have been ciphered and get to the roots of what comprises or composes our greatest primal fears and desires, which drive a lot of what we do in our waking lives without realizing it. So, this biological mechanism by which dreams protect our sleep, by transferring our unconscious thoughts into consciousness in ways that conceal our forbidden and repressed desires and fears and emotions and code them into disguised representative symbols, is what Freud termed dream work. And in Freud's view, just about all dreams are forms of wish fulfillment or anxiety fulfillment in some way, so that you can reflect on any dream you have and interpret it to find, through the dream work process, how your dream has concealed the expression of your greatest wishes or anxieties. So Freud thought that every dream has a hidden meaning that is coded over, and the meanings themselves are replaced by representative symbols. And all we have to do as the analysts of these dreams is to correctly unravel them and undo the substitution that dream work has made in order to arrive at this hidden meaning. Dreams, in Freud's view, are formed as a result of two mental processes. The first process involves unconscious forces that construct a wish that is expressed by the dream, and the second is the process of censorship that forcibly distorts the expression of that wish through dreamwork mechanisms, including the three on this slide: condensation, displacement, and representation. Freud proposed that an analyst can differentiate between the manifest content and the latent content of a dream. The manifest content refers to the remembered narrative that plays out in the dream itself, so the obvious stuff, the denotative symbols in the dream, whereas the latent content refers to the underlying meaning of the dream. And during sleep, latent content is transferred to manifest content through dream work, as our unconscious minds condense and displace and forms representations of the dream content, leaving the latent content to be often unrecognizable to the individual upon waking, and all they remember is the manifest content, which again distorts and disguises and conceals the latent meanings. But by interpreting dreams using Freud's method, it can lead to knowledge and understanding of the unconscious activities of the mind that produces the manifest content. The first dreamwork mechanism we'll talk about is condensation. And Dreams are relatively brief in duration compared to the sheer range and abundance of dream thoughts. And it's through condensation, also known as compression, that all of these dispersed, latent dream thoughts can be neatly and cohesively compressed into the content of one presentable dream. So imagine taking an entire book's worth of ideas and concepts and condensing all of those thoughts into the space of a brief paragraph where suddenly those ideas are a lot more hasty and jumbled and disorderly. So the dream work mechanism of condensation is the mind's combining and merging of different unconscious thoughts from various areas of life into one composite dream image that expresses multiple meanings. This means that dreams may not just convey one thought or worry to you. What you're experiencing in your dream could represent an amalgamation of thoughts or worries pertaining to very different areas of your life, all bundled into one dream, which may not make much sense on the surface as a result of this mashing together of unrelated thoughts and issues. For example, the facial features of two or more people in your life may be combined into one person in your dream, or the architectural features of two or more places you've been to in your life may be combined into one dream setting. I'm sure you've experienced something familiar to that. And the second mechanism of dream work we'll discuss is displacement. Displacement occurs when the dream may redirect or transfer our unconscious latent feelings or desires by attaching them to an object or person that seems unrelated on the manifest level. So it's also called transference, where your feelings towards one person or place or thing is transferred onto a person or a different person or place or thing within your dream. So this is occurring when the manifest dream content doesn't resemble in any meaningful or logically connected way the latent meaning of a dream. So that the objects and situations you find in your dream may represent or symbolize something else entirely, commonly an unconscious, latent thought or desire. So let's say your feelings towards your partner in everyday life may be transferred on to another figure in your life. Maybe you've been working closely with a coworker on a project together a lot lately, and in your dream, you are treating and acting towards this coworker figure who isn't your partner as if they were your partner, because that manifest dream figure of a coworker is displacing unconscious thoughts and feelings that are actually directed towards one's partner who doesn't appear in the dream directly. So your partner has been displaced by your coworker in that dream. All of your thoughts and feelings and emotions that you have towards your partner, you are now redirecting them towards this somewhat associated but different figure of a coworker in your dream. And thirdly, we have representation. And this is the dream work process where there's a causal relation between two or more dream thoughts. So when a character or object or setting is substituted for a different one in the dream. And this, unlike displacement, happens during the dream. So displacement from the beginning of your dream till the end, that coworker is displacing your partner. But with representation, the substitution of different people or places or things happens during the dream as you're experiencing it in an almost seamless way. So let's say you're in a dream and you're walking around with your friend, but their identity is suddenly yet seamlessly substituted for your neighbor. And then again later in the dream, they turn into your dad. Or you're walking in your childhood neighborhood and then take a left turn and suddenly you're on campus, but you don't really react to the fact that you just changed locations. And then you take another turn and you're at your old workplace. Again, not really reacting to this seamless shifting of characters and locations as they're happening around you in your dream. You just keep going about your business and doing what you're doing in a dream. You don't really stop and think about like, hey, Why am I now talking to my dad when 5 minutes ago you were my neighbor and then 5 minutes before that you were my friend? The reason for this representation to occur is that there must be some subconscious associations that we're making between these figures and places that our brains are showing us through how they represent them in our dreams. So subconsciously, we must associate our friend with our neighbor and our dad. It's not like we consciously make these causal connections in our waking life. Like, oh, there's my friend. They remind me of my neighbor and my dad in this way and that way. Instead, there are conceptual associations that are forming beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, but they're still being made. Those connections are still real and they still form and influence how we treat these people who we unconsciously associate with each other and how we unconsciously behave towards them. So knowing this, knowing the dream work processes, Freud thought that a person's dreams can be traced back to reveal key insights into their underlying pathological issues, such as their phobias or their obsessions or their compulsions, and that bringing these latent issues to light and raising them to the level of conscious awareness can unravel them and free the patient from their grip. So these issues that are unconsciously plaguing the individual in their everyday lives, Freud thought that he and the patient could jointly get to the root of the issue through analyzing their dreams. And once they're brought to the level of conscious awareness, then they're kind of robbed of the power that they have over the individual. So the same way that Freud, as a doctor in his profession, looked for psychological and physical symptoms of various ailments, Freud also interpreted dreams as symptoms of underlying pathologies. Like just like doctors monitor and examine a heartbeat to try to figure out what's going on with the person physically, Freud saw dreams as like a heartbeat in that sense, in that they could be examined to know more about how that person is functioning. And it's very important to keep in mind that Freud's body of evidence from which he drew all of his conclusions and formed his theory was based on his specific patients who were under his study for various illnesses. So a relatively small number, a relatively small sample size, and consider who his patients were. His patients were pretty much all high class clientele at the time. So it's a very narrow socioeconomic sample size from which he's drawing broad conclusions regarding human nature and the nature of the mind, which may not represent anyone who falls outside of this demographic and this time period in late 19th century Europe, because people's ways of defining and conceptualizing their medical conditions and issues and their shared definitions of what's medically normal and abnormal and what experiences are considered illness change depending not only on the social class they belong to, but also, of course, the time period. And a lot of Freud's patients were upper class women who were at the time considered to be suffering from a neurological condition called hysteria, where they acted hysterical or, perceived and labeled as acting in a frantic way and posing a danger to oneself or others. And it was considered a medical condition at the time, which required young women who were labeled as such to be studied and experimented on by psychiatrists and psychologists and have their subjective experiences defined for them and medical interventions prescribed for them by the pretty much always older white male doctors at the time, which again demonstrates the discursive construction of mental health, because certain behaviors, such as women being assertive and strong-willed and boisterous, basically anything considered a deviation from the norm of naturalized feminine characteristics at the time, were discursively reconstructed as being unnatural and abnormal and not making sense or possessing meaning for people in the subject position of women at the time, thus constituting a mental health condition to describe certain women who were acting in ways that could challenge or undermine the existing male-dominated social structures and discourses. So these women and their values and actions were redefined by existing medical discourse at the time. And they were just labeled as having the mental illness of hysteria so that they could be dismissed as merely being hysterical and alienated from society, and their erratic, transgressive behavior couldn't unsettle existing power relations. And then these women were often hospitalized in a psychiatric ward and subjected to various studies and treatments to bring these people as subjects under the scope of a medical discourse that seeks to control and regulate them and stop them from being destabilizing or challenging to the powers that be. A lot of the powerful, assertive young women we have today in various social fields would likely have been labeled as hysterical by medical discourse if they were living in Freud's time. And the discourse operating in that time period would have effectively robbed them of their field of potential action before they would even have a chance to make the kinds of far-reaching changes they're making in our present-day social context. So like Greta Thunberg or Billie Eilish, like if they were to have been born in Freud's time, they would never have gotten the opportunities or the platforms that they have now because they would have just been disregarded as being hysterical and having the medical condition of hysteria. According to Freud, observing and recounting one's dream requires them to enter into a relaxed mental state, temporarily suppressing and suspending all critical faculties, such as the part of their ego that watches over and restrains the id according to notions of social propriety, in order for those patients to adopt a loose and impartial attitude that freely lets in any subconscious ideas and observations that may have otherwise been filtered out by one's conscious reasoning as unimportant or irrelevant or embarrassing. Like you've probably had the common experience of being on the verge of falling asleep, and in that weird state of mind where you're already half asleep and your thinking during that state is very random, as if you're already dreaming. And involuntary ideas emerge thanks to that relaxation of that critical faculty we all have that we use to restrictively direct the course of our ideas while we're awake. So getting into this relaxed mindset functions as like a truth serum injection that eliminates any self-censorship and lets that free flowing of ideas, of subconscious ideas, come to fruition. So you can think of it like your conscious mind is a gate that's being guarded. And by getting into a relaxed mental state, you're literally letting your guard down to let some unconscious thoughts and recollections slip through the gate and emerge into your awareness as you speak it into existence from the void of the unconscious in a stream of consciousness, which, when spoken and revealed, can then be examined and analyzed by the doctor and patient to interpret both the structure of the dreams and, more importantly for Freud, the pathological ideas underlying them. So you could also think of hypnotism, how in order to be hypnotized, you need to be in this very suggestible state. So just like being hypnotized, you need to make yourself very sleepy, and it helps to lie down and get physically relaxed and close your eyes and just get rid of all that self-criticism, that tight lid that we put on our unconscious thoughts in our everyday life. Just let that pop open, and whatever comes out, and just be impartial to that flow of consciousness as you're speaking. So this is why a lot of psychiatrists' offices, such as the one in the background of this slide, will feature the now famous image of the psychiatrist's couch, officially called a Victorian daybed for those interested. It's that half couch, half bed that patients can lie on to loosen up while talking to the psychiatrist and get more comfortable and get into a position in which they're more amenable to revealing their mind's most innermost secrets. Freud was the first psychiatrist to have such a couch in his office, and he considered it an integral part of psychologically preparing patients for his talk-based psychoanalytic approach. So Freud's influence is felt strongly today, not only in modern psychiatric discourses, knowledge, and practices, but also its material structures and the way it orients objects and subjects in space.